All right, good afternoon, everyone. It is my favorite day of the week, Thursday, our weekly web session. We're going to get started right at 2, but if you want to talk up today's session on social media, feel free to do that using the xAPI Gnome. And our presenter today is Matt Cleaver. You can tag him as well, and feel free to use the hashtag xAPI Cohort. We are in Kaltura. There are some different ways to engage, and just want to make sure that everybody has their mics muted and that their audio is connected. Sometimes you might have to hop in and out and refresh the page if you're having some audio issues. And if you have questions or want to raise your hand, although we are going to prioritize using the chat for questions, and we suggest using the room chat, as that is full access to all the over 40 participants that are joining today, and we might have lots of thought leaders in the chat that can answer. With that, we are officially in our third week together for the Spring 2021 cohort. This session is recorded. We share out this recording freely to folks who sign up for cohort and also on our social media channels. So just that little note, right now, cohort is at 545 people signed up, which is great. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about where your team should be, and Matt's going to do an overview of getting your teams into GitHub so that we can start having updates next week. And then Matt is also going to go through a demo on how to send data from something that's not e-learning. So that is the bulk of our conversation and our learning today. Behind the screen, we have our two producers, Aaron and Jamie, who can help you answer any questions you might have about tech or any needs you have about navigating our web sessions together. And then I'm Jess, and I am the xAPI Cohort host. So welcome, everyone. We're excited that you're here, and we're excited to learn together. Just as a disclaimer, as always, no one is ever late to cohort. In fact, the thing that we pride ourselves on with cohort is that it is an incredibly flexible, responsive learning experience for folks. So you might have people joining your teams in the last week of the semester, and that's perfectly fine. We record all of the web sessions, and we want folks to be able to hop in and out as freely as they need to. We know that in some parts we might have a lot of work from our day jobs that prevents us from continuing on our projects, and we want to make sure that things can be that flexible and fluid. So if anybody's just joining for the first time today, don't fret. You're never too late for cohort. We have covered how cohort works. This is officially next week we'll be moving into our focusing more on teams. So I did want to give a moment, if there's someone who's new or who hasn't been to any web session, for anyone to ask any questions around how cohort is working or how we can support you. So cohort is free, virtual, vendor neutral, though very vendor supported, right? Like we get a lot of free resources, and it's 12 weeks. So we are officially moving into, after today's session, into the second third of cohort. We have weekly web sessions right here in our Kaltura live room, which are recorded and shared freely. And then your project teams are working together in Slack, in GitHub, on Google Hangouts, and working on the projects that you want to bring to life. And on top of that, we send out a weekly email with our web session recordings and updates. So if you have any questions about how any of those things work together, feel free to put those in the chat now, and I'll be responding, and we have our producers that will also help respond to those questions as well. In terms of how our semester is progressing, we start with broad level. What is xAPI? How does xAPI work, right? And then we move into some more nitty gritty. So next week this week we're talking about how to send data from things that are not e-learning. Next week we'll move into the learning record store and your learning ecosystem, where we're going to move into learning more about states and statements and and profiles, learning analytics, IEEE, and creating dashboards and visualizations, right? And then we'll hop into some real life case studies and project team demos. I want to, in April, on April 15th and April 22nd, so around the April 8th mark, April 1st, I'll be putting a call for project team demos. I want to normalize now that project team demos don't need to be perfect. In fact, the demos are a great place to get and solicit feedback from the broader cohort, and a great place to show what you're working on and to continue learning. It doesn't have to be perfect when you share out. And I want to put that disclaimer out there now. With that, I'm not seeing any questions about how cohort works, and I would like to invite Matt up on stage, who's going to share with us how to send data from things that are not e-learning. Welcome, Matt. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jess. So welcome, everyone. If you've been in past cohorts, this is a familiar presentation, so apologize for that. But if you're new to it, we're going to talk about a few different ways to use xAPI in ways that are a little bit non-traditional and why you would want to do that. And you know, a lot of what people who are coming to the cohort are doing is a lot of e-learning. It involves an LMS, it involves standard course packages and things like that, which is fine. And that's the bulk of what people do with xAPI. But one of the cool things about cohort is being able to figure out, okay, what else can I do in addition to that? Why would I use xAPI instead of something else? So we're just going to look at a few different examples, just going to go through and talk a little bit, like I said, about why xAPI instead of something else. So there are, sorry, Outlook is asking me for my password for some random reason. So you can capture data in all sorts of ways on the web nowadays. You can, you know, send a survey, it sends it to a database. You use WordPress, it sends it to another database. You use some internal tool and it has another database. So why would you use xAPI if you've already got some other method of storing things? Well, two reasons that are just stand out. One is you've already got, you know, if you're already capturing things in an LRS, you've already got the LRS. Why use something else? You've already got the LRS, you're paying for it, storing it there. But it also keeps all your data in one place so that you've got your e-learning data, but you can also tie it to real world performance and other things that are out in the world, and you can have that all in one place and then compare without having to throw everything in a data lake and get a business intelligence tool to get. I mean, you still, you know, if you're in an organization where you don't have control over those things, there's always going to be room for those other tools and methods of capturing data. But if you're able to capture things in the LRS with xAPI, then you can connect them in these various different ways. So one of these things that we often use, just this single statement tool is sometimes used as just an example of that we use also in workshops to kind of show how xAPI works. So, you know, there's a, you know, actor, verb, object, but this is basically just a web page with a simple form. So it's just a web form. Basically, you can just, you know, create any form that's been in the web since the 90s and connect it to xAPI, send your data that way. So any type of form you want to create, any type of web tools you want to make, that's just an easy way. And the way a lot of these, especially cohort projects, work is you're just out on the web. You create some way to connect to your LRS through standard APIs, send your data that way. We have a bulk statement tool. So this one's actually a little more interesting. We also sometimes use this in workshops. But this can help as a roster to send bulk statements for a live event. So say you have some sort of instructor-led class, a workshop, some other kind of event when people used to be physically in places. But even other things that are just outside of, you know, your LMS that, you know, maybe your LMS doesn't have a way of capturing that sort of like a webinar or something. So in this case, it's hard coded. You know, this is our custom form here, but let's say this course is what we're doing right now, this non-e-learning ways to send xAPI data. We're going to say Kaltura, used to be Adobe Connect in the past, today's date. And then you can paste in an attendance list or just type it in. So I've got this Google Sheet of just fake people. I'm just going to copy this over. But you can paste that in and then just load that list of names in there. So you can just get a bunch of people. So, somebody just gathered an attendance list, or maybe it came through an email, some other form. You can just paste that in, get all those people. And like I said, this one's hard coded. We have another version where you can actually enter in your LRS information and customize what this course is, but just for example purposes, we're just putting it in this way. But then you can submit that roster of all those users and send a statement for each one of those, and not have to, go into any system and manage that sort of thing. So another example is surveys, which is obviously a really common thing. This cohort weekly check-in actually is something we used to use before we started getting weekly updates in GitHub. So we'd send out. So this one is actually using what used to be called Survey Gizmo, is now called Alchemer. But it's just a standard survey. But one of the things about Alchemer that is kind of unique among the survey tools out there is they have an xAPI integration. It does cost a little bit more. It's like an add-on, but you can connect it to xAPI. So what it will do is send a statement for each one of these questions, and they'll basically have the question data and their answer response in a statement for each one of these. So you just tell Alchemer what your LRS you want to connect to this survey is. People will submit it. So that's a cool way of using a survey tool. It will also just save it in a regular survey. So you can still use the survey analytics as much as you need to, but you can connect this, send it to your LRS as well. So this next example is a custom project that we actually did 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. I'm trying to remember. It was actually, so we have the xAPI party at the end of every cohort season, which is basically where we show off our demos. We get together and have some discussions, lead some sessions on various different things. One of the things we used to do in these xAPI parties when we were physically in the same place was have a makerspace. So we had a room set up where often I would be kind of leading that group, and we'd come up with an idea of something we wanted to accomplish that day. So basically, sort of like those I don't know, the words escaping me, but when you have just a day to come up with a project, and by the end of the day we would deliver something. So this image and note capture was one of those projects, and we kind of built on it a little bit over time. But the idea is there's an app called Rocketbook where you can capture images, and in the Rocketbook app there's like a physical notebook that you can take a picture, it'll straighten it up, clean it up, and then you can send it to different places. But the idea is you take your phone, you snap a picture, and then it'll send a statement with that picture and data about it. In this project, we had a kind of a way of using Rocketbook to send to Google Drive, which would trigger a Zapier step, which would send our xAPI to our LRS, and then we can visualize in this gallery. So, so I sent these tests earlier today. We originally just had it showing only the last 30 days, so we wouldn't have to wait for like a whole page worth of images from the past. So I took this earlier today. And then I realized when I set this one up, I forgot to add the grouping. But if you click on that, you can see some of the data we added in here. We have some of the thumbnail, some of the test data that came through. You can add this as attachments in xAPI statements. In this case, we just added it in extensions for the moment. But there are ways that you can process actual images as attachments in a statement. there's certain rules on how to do that. You can look at the spec to kind of figure that out. But that's kind of a way that you can think of, say you had somebody performing an action out in the real world. You could take a picture, send that as a statement. They could be connected to another set of activities. Maybe it's an observation checklist or something like that. So that was sort of a proof of concept, but it kind of is a nice way of showing how there's various different ways that you can use xAPI that way. Oh, and also back to that, as Megan was mentioning, when Megan would occasionally do conference presentations in the live setting, they would have the big notepads that I can't remember the name of those things, but the charts. So they would draw different things, and then they would take pictures of them and send them to this, and then she could just pull them up on the gallery and see everybody's a record of everybody's physical written progress throughout the day. So kind of a cool use of that as well. So one thing that has not been as talked about in the last couple of years, but it was really a big subject several years back, is the Internet of Things. So that's what IoT is, if you're not familiar with the acronym. So the Internet of Things, meaning physical things out in the world that are connected to the internet. So there's obviously loads of those types of things out there. Technically, somebody used Alexa. That's a thing that's connected to the internet, but there's smart switches and all sorts of things out there. So what we had done for this example, and I set this up mostly as just kind of another proof of concept, just to kind of, for the fun of it. It also kind of helped us in the office. So a lot of these things actually refer to back when we could actually physically do things. So this setup was that we had a magnet switch that connected to an Arduino controller on our conference room door. So every time somebody would open the door, it would trigger the switch, and that Arduino was connected to the internet by Wi-Fi, and it would send a statement, an xAPI statement. Actually, first it would send a statement, or it would send a message to the Zapier service. So if you're not familiar with Zapier, take a visit to zapier.com. There's a lot of cool ways that you can connect all sorts of different services together. Even non-xAPI related, it's just a cool way of connecting a lot of things together. They also do have an xAPI, a Watershed has created an xAPI connector in Zapier. So you connect all sorts of different services to your LRS. It doesn't have to be Watershed. They just are the ones that created it, but you can connect to other LRSs as well. So that's what we did here. Somebody opens or closes the door. It triggers their Arduino to send a message to Zapier, which would turn a light on in our space so that we could tell when somebody was in the room. And then it would also send to a spreadsheet. Mostly I just did that for the fun of it. Also, so I could make charts and stuff really easily. But it would also send xAPI, which you could also use to create charts and all sorts of things. So another example is Slack. So one of the things we set up a few years ago with Yet Analytics. So this is actually a dashboard from Yet Analytics. And I'm not sure they actually have this Slack connector anymore. I was looking at it the other day because someone was talking about, I think it was actually Team Slack. There's a team that's forming this season. I'm not sure they have this connector anymore, but they used to have this Slack connector in Yet Analytics that you could just tell it where, you could give it your credentials and it would connect everything together automatically. You tell it which channels. So right now in our main and social channels in Slack, it actually is still connected to our account. This is actually last season. I just didn't make an updated chart yet, but you can see how it'll send a statement and it automatically sets everything up. So you don't have to set up how the actor and where do I get the text, because there's a little bit of parsing text and things like that that they already figured out how to make it work. So somebody would join the Slack workspace. Somebody posted a message. You can kind of see where the top actors are. In this case, Megan was the top actor at that point. Some of the top verbs, and This one's interesting, the hotspots, because you could see where the activity was happening in the week and the time of day. So obviously Thursday afternoon, not so much during cohort, but right after cohort was really popular time of day to send statements, or send Slack messages, which send statements. And then Saturday is a little bit slim for people, but then Sunday kind of picks up again. So just kind of an interesting way of getting activity from other tools. And one thing that I found out recently in Trello, so you can connect Trello to xAPI or some other system that could send statements. But I recently saw that Trello has their Butler automation, and one of the Butler automations for Trello is sending HTTPS or HTTP messages. So you can set that up to create a statement. So you can say when somebody drags a card from to do to done, or to do to doing, or doing to done, you can send a statement, which is really cool. I played with that a little bit. So if anybody's curious about that, I kind of figured out how to sort of set that up. It's not too hard to do, but it's just kind of a cool way of connecting those things together as well. So this statement viewer here is just so we can kind of look at some of these statements that we just sent. So this is that big list that I sent, that bulk statement that just sent a whole bunch of things at once. So this just contains all the information, where we put those extensions. This Alchemar is basically the survey, what user called Survey Gizmo survey questions. I didn't actually send one this time, but back when we had the weekly check-in using it this way, it would actually include some of the things like your latitude, longitude. We just removed it from display here, but it would include some of that information in there. This is automatic from Survey Gizmo. And so the zinc capture, basically I just added a thumbnail there so we kind of see what it was, but this contains, actually use this one as an example because I had a better grouping in there. But you can see all the details of all these statements. Slack, so this one is, like I said, this one's still working, it's still connected. Somebody posted this, 5-10 minutes ago. This was me responding to somebody about GitHub. But you can kind of see how these are put together. And I have the, I was having problems with our LRS on my Wi-Fi at home for some reason, so I connected to my computer at work. But this is what the old door sensor used to do. Since we're not physically in office, it probably hasn't been open or closed in a while. You can see that it stopped like at March 12th of last year, which seems appropriate. But you can see when somebody, basically this one isn't particularly interesting in terms of it just in verb terms. It's just someone opened the door, they close the door, they open the door, they close the door. But aggregate over time, you could kind of see like when is the most activity. It also has some other telemetry in there, like the temperature and altitude and things like that. So you can see how the temperature changed over time. It does get hot when they close the door. In this case, it's not particularly useful for us. It was, like I said, more of a proof of concept, but there's all sorts of ways you could tie those sensors in with actual useful information, especially if you know who the actor is. You can say someone badges into a machine, they do this thing, and then this sensor sends data. We have a project at the Hands-On Museum in Ann Arbor where students have badges, and the Bluetooth badges that are connected to iPads, and then that sends statements. So all sorts of different things you can do with the Internet of Things, which is interesting. Yeah, and this door may or may not, I don't know if anybody's closed this door. It's also possible that it got disconnected, like maybe the power went off and it didn't, because I haven't been physically in the office to turn the thing back on or even check that it's even going anymore. So don't totally know if that was still going, but hardware-wise, it actually has been working for the last several years. So interesting. So those are kind of just a few different examples that we've put together over the years. But there's all sorts of different ways, and especially if you look back at some of the archived teams in Slack for cohort projects, a lot of them are unrelated to e-learning specifically. You know, obviously, that, like I said, that's a bulk of what we do a lot of the time, but there's all sorts of different ways. If you already have the LRS, why not use it as a place to put your data and connect it to other things that people are doing. Performance xAPI apps is a good example of something. I'll put that in here in case anyone hasn't heard of xAPI apps. I'm typing it wrong. That is kind of a cool way. They have some observation checklists where you can go through and send some statements of observation of somebody doing a particular task. So I am not great at presenting and reading, so I'm going to read this chat real quick. I don't know if Jess or anyone is there and saw any questions that came up that I might be able to answer. So I'm going to just scan through here real quick. Yes, flip charts. That's what it was called.
I've been watching Matt, and I haven't noticed the one question was if they'll get free access to Xaply, which they will, but there haven't been any that's come through.
Okay, thank you.
But I'll tee them up as they come through for you.
Okay, sounds good. And since I'm here sharing already, we can also talk about using GitHub in the cohort. So this has nothing to do with this presentation directly, but you can connect GitHub to xAPI, but that's not. So one thing is, you know, since starting next week, we're going to talk about, or we're going to be giving our weekly updates in GitHub, and then Jess is going to, you know, run through and kind of talk about them. You may have seen some activity in Slack about how do I join our GitHub organization? How do we get in there? So I'm going to jump into GitHub and also Slack. So if you haven't already joined GitHub for our xAPI Cohort organization, basically, we've been using this as a way to provide our weekly updates for the last couple of seasons. I'll also go to xapicohort.com/teams. You'll see the teams that have been formed in GitHub and all the updates, the last update that's been listed here. So obviously we haven't started updates yet, and some people aren't in GitHub yet. So you don't see anything here, but you can kind of see what the description of some of these things are, and what the updates are going to be. So if you haven't joined GitHub and you want to join our organization, there are several different ways in Slack to do it because they've kind of added various different ways to get to these things. So one easy way is if you go to any message area, doesn't matter what channel you're in, you can use a / command. It's just the / and start typing Teambot or Cohort or GitHub, and you'll see this one up here, join Cohort GitHub. So once you hit that, it'll open up this panel. And another way to get there is if you hit this shortcuts zap lightning bolt over here and start typing Cohort or GitHub, same thing comes up. So several different ways to get there, but it all goes to the same panel. And you can mostly just follow this form, but I'll just go through here real quick. So if I start typing any 3 letters, then it'll do a search and it'll pull up. So these are those child teams we just saw a minute ago that were in GitHub. So the parent team is the season we're in right now, spring 2021, and then all the child teams within that. So if you don't want to join a team yet, you don't know what you're going to do, or you're going to create a new team, you can just join that parent team. And that'll allow you to go in. Once you get signed up, you can go in and create a new team. So you can enter in your email if you if you don't have a GitHub account or you want to use a different GitHub account, you get an email. But if you're already connected to GitHub and on some other way, like maybe through your organization or your personal GitHub, you can use your GitHub username and it will try to connect those two together. So you don't have to create a separate account. So either one of those, once you click send request, then GitHub should send you an invite to your email. Or if it's a GitHub account, you can go into your GitHub and you should see a pending invite there. So once you do all that and get into GitHub itself, so this is spring 2021, you'll see a Teams panel over here. So some of the way the GitHub Teams works is that they're kind of nested within each other. So there's the cohort and its teams, and then each season is a team, and then the child teams that are within that. So there's a template in here that kind of shows kind of how to set these up and how to set up your updates, things like that. You can feel free to take a look at those when you're in here. But there's some, when you get into the spring team, you can kind of see some instructions on how to add a repository and connect it if you want. You don't have to use a repository. And actually for any cohort teams, maybe they're being talked about here in the chat, but I can't read it yet. But you don't have to use GitHub for anything other than weekly updates for your team if you don't want. But mostly, it's a way of capturing this information for posterity, especially if you have code you want to put in a repository, make it public. But by default, these teams are private. So all the teams in our cohort organization here are private. That's just the way that they work. So to be able to see them, you have to join. But you don't have to necessarily do anything or create a repository for your code if you don't want to. Don't even have to use the discussion features if you don't want to, except for team updates, but they're there if you do. You can also connect it to Slack if you want and see your activity in Slack, but those are all just optional things. So I'm sure that I'm just rushing through this, and I'm sure there's a lot of things that I've missed, but if you have any questions, you can reach out to me on Slack at MP Cleaver with a K, and ask any questions about that. I don't know, Jess, have you seen any questions that have come through? It looks like they're being answered mostly.
Yeah, there were some questions around having multiple GitHub pages, and some clarity around, and then some questions around their repositories and teams not showing up. So that might just be a matter of pending approvals that we can follow up offline.
Yeah, and usually, sometimes if you create a team and you try to add it as a parent or a child of the parent season, it won't do it immediately, and I usually will see a pending thing here, and I might have to approve it. I don't see any here right now, so maybe if anybody has any direct questions, let me know. And it is occasionally a little convoluted just because of the way GitHub works, but it is a nice way of if we go back to the main page here for the cohort, we have all our repositories from past.
So that's the one.
Past seasons.
Team Slacker might be in the wrong parent group. That's a question. That's someone or
Team SLR task. So it looks like there's two repositories. One of them is private and one is public. So those are two repositories. And so the way it works in GitHub with teams is that you can have a team. So yeah, I don't see a team in here for SLR tasks. So if you want to do that, you can just go to add a team and add it here. And actually, I can do that while I'm just in here if nobody minds, just so we can kind of see how that works. Team SLR task, yeah. So if it doesn't exist, it'll say create team. So I'll go ahead and create that. You can add a description there. I'll let you all do that. Parent team is automatic because I was already in there, but if it's not, you can choose it from the drop down. Typically, you want it to be visible. Otherwise, how are people going to get to it? So Then we'll create that team. And then now we're just in our blank. You can add a description here, add a logo or some other image there if you want. You can invite members to it. So right now there's only one member because I created it, it's just me. If you wanted to connect that repository, you can go to repositories, add repository, and since we know that there are two of them, then I can actually connect that repository to this team. So basically all it does, if you create a repository by itself, it's disconnected. It's just part of the organization as a whole. And if you create a team, then you can connect those two. It doesn't really, it just is a way of saying this repository is part of this team, and that people who are part of that, who become members of that team, can also access that repository. But so it's not a big deal. You don't have to connect it that way if you don't want. It does make it a little bit easier to say, oh, this repository goes with this team.
Yeah, and I think that there was some confusion around the jump from the presentation around sending data from things that are not e-learning to our conversation around GitHub. And so for folks that are maybe confused with that jump, what happened was Matt walked through a few case examples of how to send data from some things that were not e-learning, and then moved into how we use GitHub for Cohort. So that was that transition there.
Yeah, and since I was already sharing, I just jump from one thing to the next. But yeah, I could have stopped, came back, but we just kind of went from one thing to the next.
All right. So I'm going to go back to our presentation. No, Mark, that was actually one of the items on our to-do list, was to cover some of the GitHub. So that's part of Cohort business. So the way that Cohort works is, in the beginning, we have usually a presentation from outside thought leader that's talking about different ways that xAPI is used. So today we talked about how xAPI can be used for things other than e-learning. And then we get into some cohort business. And next week will be the first time that when we get into cohort business, teams will be sharing, the first time this semester, teams will be sharing their status updates. So one of the logistics for this week is to talk more about how that is going to work. And the way that works is through GitHub. So thank you for that conversation in the chat. And Brian, that's a good question. Are there specific requirements for updates to show up on the teams? Yes. So the notation, when you put your update, you put the date, like, so it's like the team update, and then put your date in the title of that update when you submit them on your chat. All right, so Matt just walked through GitHub pages for projects. If there are still confusion or you need support on how to set those up, please feel free to Slack all of us. You can Slack me, or you can Slack Matt, or you can Slack Jamie. We're all there to support you and get those up and running, so that next week when we do team updates, we'll be able to access your team pages on GitHub to do that. All right, so today we want to talk about some of the free stuff that a team gets with Cohort. So everybody is getting Kaltura, and the Kaltura media space login and information is rolling out on a rolling basis. So you should, weekly we send out emails. So if you haven't gotten your email yet, it's coming. If you want your login information sooner, just shoot us a message and we'll check on the back end to see if those have come out. We have a Domino One access, xAPI apps access, Xaply. If you're looking for Xaply, I saw that as a question in the chat. You can message Matt Cleaver in the cohort Slack for access. And we also have a Slack channel specifically for free stuff. So there are other offers that come in throughout cohort, and we invite folks to just place them there. And we have Learning Locker LRS access, Veracity access, and Watershed access, and how you access all of those are there. If you have questions about how to get access to this free stuff, feel free to shoot me a message in Slack. A team does not need to use GitHub for the repository. We do ask that teams create a page on GitHub for your status updates to keep the conversation streamlined when we have them weekly. So what we do is pull up the cohort website and go team to team to give their updates. Next week will be the first time that we have team updates. We ask that you keep your team update to 5 minutes or less. Big picture, we want to know what you worked on in the previous week, what you plan on working on in the next week, and what support you could use from the cohort. And next week will be the first time that we have some of that report out from our teams. Okay, and if you do not have a team yet, that is a perfectly okay place to be. What I would suggest you doing, since we have a little time, I'm going to go through the chat and respond to some of these folks. So if you don't have a team yet, that's perfectly fine. You can either observe other teams and what they're doing in Slack and add yourself in, see how you can support, or you can still be thinking about what you want to do and what your team is accomplishing. And maybe you won't even start with the team until we're in week 6 or 8. That's perfectly fine. Cohort is flexible, and your participation is flexible in that way. If you have questions around what joining a team looks like, what types of teams you want to join, what types of projects you want to work on, you can start in the main channel in Slack, or you can reach out to me personally and we can talk through what are your goals for cohort and how you can meet those goals through our project teams. All right, if there are no other questions, I will cover some good stuff to know. So some good stuff to know is that we meet here in the same room every week at 2 o'clock. Next week, we'll have our presentation by Chris Tompkins, who will be sharing more about what a learning record store is and how it fits into your learning ecosystem. Our party, the registration for party is open, or you can learn more online at the website there. It is May 14th. It's completely online. It's a really great opportunity to both participate as a presenter. We haven't opened that link yet. We haven't opened the call for proposals yet. But it is also a really great networking space where you can meet other folks that are in the xAPI community and hear from them. When you go to our website to learn more about the party, you can see some of the presentations that were facilitated last year and just see kind of how Party works. It's called Party, but it is an online conference and learning opportunity. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm Jess Jackson in Slack, or send a message to xAPI Cohort at Torrance Learning. And I think that is all that I have for you today. So we'll get out a little early. If you're still need support with GitHub, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I want to reiterate what Megan is saying in the chat, like no one is behind. We are all here learning. And if you need some support in that learning, please don't hesitate to reach out. I did have a song I was going to test today. I'm from Detroit and I'm learning about our history in jazz. I live around the corner from Baker's, which is the world's oldest jazz club. And Barry Harris is one of our pianists. So I wanted to play a little Barry Harris as we finish up our day today and honor Black history every day. Have a great day and continue to go out there and learn and make things.